In this video, we're going to tackle one of the most annoying things that happens when you work with data, discrepancies. You have a number on one source and the number of a second source, which should be identical, at least to you, doesn't match. And then we have a discrepancy. So how do we figure it out? How do we debug this and get to the bottom of it? Let's talk about that in this video. Hi there, my name is Ruben, and I'm a data strategist at Practical Analytics. I help companies of all sizes go from strategy all the way to insight and taking those insights and making better decisions with them. Now, along the way, we're gonna run into discrepancies. That is, two data sources don't match. The major issue with this isn't so much a discrepancy, is that it causes trust issues. And when you're working with a company or an executive or a team and they don't trust the data, you might as well not give them anything. So we really have to work through these discrepancies, figure out what is going on to build trust and maintain trust. And like I said, in other places, you lose trust one report at a time, and thus you have to build trust one report at a time. Let's first look at 3 reasons why this tends to happen. You know, I call this funky data, and there's really 3 scenarios that can cause funky data. One is technical issues. This is what people default to. That is, there's something technically wrong with how the data was captured, so this is why the numbers don't make sense. Now, this may be the case, but remember, it's only one of 3 reasons. And in a lot of cases, in my experience, it's not even the major reason. It's typically a minor portion of cases. How we track data from a technical perspective is getting better day after day. And you have some data sources that are extremely accurate. Things like payment processing data, sometimes CRM data, depending on how it's entered, it can be very accurate. Now, the second scenario is misaligned expectations. And in this one, there was an expectation of what the number should be. At some point, some analysis was done, how thorough or complex it was or comprehensive, who knows? But they came up and said, you know what? The conversion rate for our sign-up funnel right now is 10%. We did some numbers, that's roughly what we expect. And then one day you actually get data. So you get very thorough data, you have enough historical numbers, and you present a number that is 6%. And now people say, whoa, we've been operating under this assumption that we have a 10% conversion rate. Now you're showing me 6, what gives? Clearly your number's wrong. The misaligned expectation has been set at some point, and you have to work through it. You have to figure out what's the gap and how do you actually get people to come around. And the third reason is actually just unexpected calculations or flows. And in this case, whenever you have a calculation of any kind, and that's really what any report is, you're calculating something, you have to really understand what is being included in a calculation. I've seen cases where you're looking at new subscriptions, very clear, right? But then you realize, you know what, does it include brand new users? What about users who signed up before, cancel, and now they're active and again? It really depends on terms, and everyone might cover terms differently. Even within the same company, I've seen people use different terms. So 3 scenarios, technical issues, and in that case, you really just have to fix them from a technical perspective. Misaligned expectations, you have to really work through the team, explain why this is the actual number, explain why maybe the previous number was incorrect, and unexpected calculations. And in this case, again, you have to really break apart what is being calculated and try to figure out what is the gaps or the differences in terminologies being used. Once we have data and you sort to work through it, let me give you a few tips that can also help you. So I have my computer here and I want to show you a few things. And this is going to be very simple, very straightforward, as I think most things should be. So in front of us, we have an Excel file. And whenever I'm debugging thing, Excel is usually my go-to. It's some of the quickest way of doing it. Your preference might be to use Python or SQL or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. Now, what we want to do here is get our 2 data sources. So data source A, data source B, the ones that don't match. And we want to put them in front of us. Then we want to have an identifier between them. So in this case, for example, we could use something like order ID and try to match them between data source A, data source B. If you don't have a mutual identifier, this is not going to go anywhere. It's going to be much harder. But if you have a mutual identifier, we can do this. Now, we always want to look at the past. So, I may be looking at 30 days in the past, but things already happened. Some software analytics tools take some time to process data. Some are real time, and some might take up to 24 hours, 48 hours. So we want to make sure that we're clearly in the past. Whatever processing needed to happen already happened. We have our historical data, we have our past. The first thing we want to look at here is ensuring that both data sources are in the same time zone. A very common thing, you have Pacific time or Eastern time, and even just a 2-3 hour difference can mean a big discrepancy depending on how much volume you're actually looking in any given period. Most data sources by default are UTC, Universal Time Zone, and there's just some kind of layer that's put upon it. And then once we have it, we can do a conditional formatting here to match duplicate values among two columns. And then you get to see in, say in this example, which orders are present in data source A and which orders are not present in data source B. You get to see, and what you might realize is you might actually have missing orders from both sources. That is, there's some orders that are in data source A but not B, and some that are in data source B but not A. That's really where you have to go debug. So you take, individual orders and you try to figure out why did this happen. Why is this data source here but not here? You may again come across things that are extremely normal, but the data isn't able to reflect. For example, someone refunded something, and once they're refunded, it doesn't get counted as an order, depending on how you pull this report, versus one source is final. So things like that. And you'll discover that as you go through the individual orders and try to find them. And from there you say, what? Reason why, refunds. Reason two, it turns out we had a tracking issue, a technical tracking issue on mobile from July 1st to the 7th, so we're missing orders there, and so on. Now, you may not get 100%, but if you get the bulk of them, you really start to build trust on the data. Remember, a lot of this data that we're working with is directionally. We may not need 100% of the data, we just need to see what the trends are and what the patterns are, depending on what you're working on. So we really just want to understand what elements of the data and how it's captured or how it's calculated may be affecting it. And we can do that by comparing it. 3 things you can do to prevent discrepancies from happening in the future. 1, pick a few major points. This may be purchases or refunds or cancellations, a few major data points, and you want to check those on a regular basis. It may be monthly to begin with if you had a lot of issues with data trust, and eventually you can move to quarterly as you get better. You should also look into setting up anomaly tracking. That is, if there's big spikes or drops in your data, for someone to be notified. Those things could be completely fine and expected, which is fine, and it might be an opportunity to explore, or there may be some kind of issue in how data is being tracked or collected. And 3, you can also consider tracking less. If you have 100 data points and you have very little trust among all of them, it's sort of kind of pointless. You might as well pare down, get accurate data points, and then build back up. And that is all we have. If you have any questions, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe and like. You'll find some buttons all over this page. There's also going to be a link to the Growth Needle. This is my weekly newsletter. I share ideas like this one, but through text format. There's special links, questions, resources, events. There's a bunch of stuff. So I think you enjoy that. So look for that in the description. And if you have any questions or comments, you can also post them in the comments section below. I'm always excited to see what people are saying or thinking after they watch the content. And you might find other people might also provide their own ideas and feedback. Until next time, talk soon.